I've got titanium white, primary yellow, yellow ochre, alizarin crimson, cadmium red. The cadmium red's there only probably for these little bits of colour on the tree there. Maybe we could use it a little bit in the rooftop. Got ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, burnt sienna and sap green. Got a nice selection of brushes that I've taken out of my oil well and just wiped them off. So plenty of brushes to be going on. Got tissue in my hand, and I tend to just tear off loads of bits of tissue and just put them down in front of me, so I've got plenty to be picking up as I go, because I'm constantly wiping the brush off between mixes and so on. But I tend to try and keep a brush for a particular, so certainly on this painting we'll want to keep brushes for the white and the black. So I think I'll paint the sky afterwards, and the reason for that is that I can just come in and cut in along here and give a real sharp edge to the top of the rooftops. So perhaps we'll start with the tiles here that we can see. Paint that shadow. There's a soft edge on that shadow, so it looks red. So actually I very rarely use the cadmium red, but other than just things like flowers or tail lights on cars, I think it muddies more than the alizarin crimson, so we just got to be a bit more careful with it. So that's much too saturated, so we want to steer it towards grey, really. So if I had some yellow ochre, which has got yellow and blue in it, let's steer that towards. So it's still too dark, but it's the right colour. So just a little bit of white will lighten that. So we've got the right colour now, and you've got a couple of options. You can individually paint every little bit across there, but probably, just drag the brush across. That's how I would go for it. That would be the loose, impressionistic way of doing it, and much quicker. And it's actually in more shadow over this side, so it's actually darker. So if we just check, and when I sort of close one eye and squint slightly, it looks to me as if it goes towards purple. So I would add ultramarine blue, because the ultramarine blue is a blue that steers more towards purple than the cobalt blue. And just do a little check, and that's pretty much spot on. So we can paint that into there and just lay the paint on top of what's there, but I'll leave almost a strong contrast between the two there, because that's going to exaggerate the light. And then we've got the little bit of overhang of the building next to it. So I'm being careful not to lose my drawing by doing this, that if I sort of go in and start painting the walls on the building, and all of a sudden I've lost where the roof is and where these windows are and things. So we've taken the effort to do an accurate drawing, so it's best not to lose the drawing, because it's easy to get lost. And then we've got the little shadow under here, which looks to be more red on this side and then goes more towards blue on that side. So the mix we've just done for there looks pretty good for underneath here, so I shall pull that across there. And I'm just using a round size 2, but you could use a flat brush for that. And then I'll just add perhaps a little bit of cobalt blue, which will be a cooler blue than the ultramarine blue. And then again, just do a little test. That looks pretty good. So thanks for watching this video so far, and please hit the like and subscribe. It will really help the channel out. A lot of you who watch my video regularly haven't subscribed, so YouTube tell me, so I'd really appreciate if you do that. And stick around and watch the full video. It's a workshop, this one, so I really go into depth with it, so hopefully there's going to be some good information there for you. And if you decide to give this painting a go, good luck. And if you join Tier 2 of my website membership, all the reference images and everything you need to do the demos on there as well, plus lots of other demos. So let's get on with the video. And the way to paint these shadows, it would be probably a mistake and quite difficult to perhaps paint the building all the same colour and then paint the shadow over the top of it, because you're going to pick up the paint underneath it and you'll have to allow for that. So it's much easier to just put the colour and the tonal value of that shadow where it goes. So I'll do that, paint that shadow next. So it's a grey. So there's several ways you can mix greys. If you've got black and white, that's your most neutral grey, but not particularly exciting, which is why I don't generally have black on the palette. We can use complementary. So say if we had red and green together, that probably will actually give us brown. But we're certainly desaturating those colours. And if we add in a third primary, you're going to get grey. So for instance, if we add some blue into that, we're going to get more of a grey. So that's a very dark grey. So we can lighten the value with white. So that's a grey. And to me, that steers to a warm grey. Whereas we've got a cool grey here because it's in the shadows. So generally speaking, it's perhaps going to be cooler. So I can add more blue, which will cool that grey off. So it's probably the right colour, but it's way too dark in value. So I'm going to pick a big lump of white and put it next to that pile and see where we are with this. So it's now too cool. So I will need to warm it back up a little bit. So a little bit of red, but I'm just dabbing at the red there ever so slightly because it's quite powerful. And that's all I think about with these greys, is just have a look at, you know, it's just as easy to mix that grey as it is to mix that blue. You know, it's just ask the same questions. Is it, you know, get to a grey, which is mix your primary colours together in equal parts, add some white to lighten the value, and then steer it towards red, blue, yellow, whichever way you want to go. So that's a grey for this area here. So we'll perhaps put the grey on there, see what it looks like, but we can perhaps throw in some, you know, blues and reds, purples afterwards maybe, and try and make it a little bit more exciting. So because I've got a toned ground, if I leave some of that toned ground to come through, that will probably make it slightly more interesting. And I'm going to paint all of this same value here, but it does shift to be a little bit lighter here, a little bit darker here, but I'll make those adjustments afterwards. But let's just go for blocking in the canvas, make sure we've got everything in the right place. And thinking about edges, there's a fairly sharp edge there, but it's a little bit softer as it gets further into the shadows. And I trace with an A4 piece of paper, but this panel's actually bigger than A4, but I just carried the perspective lines on basically, so that will just carry on to make the image fit on the scene. So I'll just put it in roughly here, leave some of that canvas to come through, but I've painted around those windows because I don't want to lose where they are in that doorway. We'll come back to that. So let's have a look at this shadow here, this little triangle area here. That looks to be slightly warmer because perhaps it's getting some light bouncing off the underside of these red tiles. So that's perhaps why. So we've got the grey here, so we can use that. Just perhaps pull some of it over here. So we can add some red. Either red will do. I'll use the Zion Crimson because it's transparent, whereas the cadmium red is more opaque. And for shadows, I think transparent colours can be a little bit nicer. So we'll paint that into there. And we've got a soft edge, so we can't see where the red of the tiles ends and the shadow starts. We'll bring that down there. And again, it does get darker down here, but let's just block it in first, and then we'll do all the little subtle changes as they happen. And then the shadow probably goes a little bit cooler off here. So that's really what I'm looking at. So I'll just add some blue into there. When I'm painting, is I'm looking at the tonal value, making sure I get that the correct tonal value, i.e. is this brush, the paint on the brush, darker or lighter than what I'm looking at? And I generally just close one eye, squint, and if the end of the brush disappears, you know you've got it spot on. And just make the adjustment. I look to see whether, because you might have the right tonal value, but the wrong temperature, you know, and that's going to throw the painting off. So you want to ask yourself, you know, is this warmer or cooler? And if it's warmer, add a bit of red. If it's cooler, add a bit of blue. So we've got some red in here. So I'll leave that part because I think when we've got a complete colour change, you know, we've gone from bluey grey to now red down here. I'll take another brush. If we try and paint that red over the blue, it's going to make that red more purpley. So let's take a bit of cadmium red or alizarin crimson. Again, it's too saturated. So the big pile of grey here is useful, just to add into that red. It's too light. If I add white, it will probably send it towards pink, which it still looks quite red, so I'll add yellow. And that was too much, so a bit more red to bring it back. So too dark, perhaps now I can add a bit of white. And actually probably needs just a touch of blue, because it looks, the reference looks more purpley rather than the red that I had here. And it is so deceptive, the colour you think you've seen, when you actually mix it and put it on the end of your brush, that's close enough, I'll go with that. So it's a lot of effort mixing these colours, but it's what will make your painting look convincing. So we'll go for that for the moment. And what I sometimes will do is I'll just wipe the paint off the brush, and if I want to feather that into there, I'll just use the side of the brush. And that may well be finish that part of the painting, but it's difficult to tell until it's all done. But there's no point trying to fix it, because you might fix something that doesn't need fixing, because you know that might be actually perfect. So we'll see. So that's why I go for covering the whole panel first and then make changes. So we've got another shape here, which is quite a straightforward shape, which looks to be a bluey grey. So again, I'll just add some blue, perhaps some yellow, which will give me green. Add some red, which will give me probably brown. And now I want to steer it back towards the bluey grey, so add more blue. So now I've got the right colour, or the right colour grey. I'm not sure we actually call grey a colour, but to add some white. And now we've got the right tonal value, but it's too cold. And so I just need to add a bit of red. But I know I thought that was a cool grey, but you know what I mixed was too cool. So it's all relative. But you know, red can be warm and red can be cool. You know, it depends on the colour next to it. You know, if you've got a really warm red, a cooler red next to it will be a cool colour. So that's the right tonal value and temperature. So that's what I drew in. So I'll just follow that perspective line so it fits on my canvas there. And there's a fairly crisp edge there where the base of the building meets. And I'll just paint around those steps. And almost use these directional brush marks that lead us into the scene, rather than if I painted them all going across, you know, it'd probably be more effective to do them like that. You know, that draws us into the scene. And then the steps are quite dark, so I've just wiped that brush off again. That's probably not a good idea to paint your whole scene with one brush, but I quite often end up doing that. So ultramarine blue and the alizarin crimson will give me a strong dark. It's probably too purple, so if I just add a little bit of yellow ochre, that will steer it towards grey. And if you think about your colour wheel, yellow on the opposite end of the colour wheel to purple, that's why that's going to make more of a neutral. So these steps, the only way to make them look convincing is to put the steps in the right place. I did draw them on there, but I know I'm going to lose them, but I shall try and get them in the right place. But I suppose I'm quite a lazy painter in the fact that I really don't really want to just paint in between each line and then put that little highlight on the step. I probably would just try and wing it. But we'll see. See how it goes. And there's a fairly sharp edge there. But it's the actual, probably the shape here that makes it look like a staircase more than anything. And again, I'm using now brush marks going horizontal because that's probably a more convincing way to paint those steps. So that brush is probably a bit small for some of this other stuff, but perhaps we'll continue. We'll paint the rooftops here and we can perhaps paint the sky then. So again, the red is a good starting point. Mix it into something on there which will desaturate it. Do a little test. That's actually pretty good. Again, I'll just follow that perspective line. And then there's a grey underneath it. So again, I just wipe that brush off, pick up some of that grey that we've mixed elsewhere. Check it, that's pretty good. And put that under there. So, slightly bigger brush now, I think. We could put the sky in. That'll be a nice little break. We've been doing stuff that we need to really pay attention to tonal values and correct angles and shapes and so on. So have a little break. So the sky looks like a proper blue sky. So ultramarine blue will be too purple for that. So I haven't got cerulean blue on here, but probably cobalt blue will get us close. So that's too dark in value. So again, we've got two options to lighten the value here. We've got the white or the yellow. Obviously the yellow will steer it towards green. So white is our only option there. Again, just check the value. Still too dark. And then you probably don't notice it until you actually offer up the blue and the white to it. But you can now actually see it does actually steer towards green. So you would add the smallest touch of yellow, literally just corner of the brush just touched on yellow. And then that probably will end up giving you almost probably cerulean blue. So that's exactly the colour there. So I'll paint the top part first, leave a little gap between the rooftops so I don't pull that rooftop into it. Again, maybe if I leave some of that orange come through, that's not going to be a problem. Reload the brush. So here now I'm actually using a slightly softer brush. This is a synthetic. This is a Rosemary & Co. Ivory Round, a very worn one. So it does give more of a neater edge and a bit more control. So if I reload that brush up and just drag it across like that. And you'll probably get a varied edge, some hard and some soft edge. But I will go with whatever happens there because it'll look better if you just go with your first mark rather than working over it, make a mistake, paint the sky into the roof, and then you have to paint the roof back out again. All those little things you have to do twice, you lose that fresh spontaneity. Which is why watercolors look so spontaneous a lot of the time, because they can only really be done on the first attempt, if they're done well, that when you have to go over things again, they then look overworked and muddy. And it's the same with loose oil painting. The more you can do it in one go, the better. So there's my blue sky. And I used to get the skies wrong when I was outdoors painting, and or even just in general painting, and I probably always painted them much too light in value, almost sort of, you know, the white of the paper sort of light value. But I can remember we were in Provence, in the Dordogne in France, and I was trying to paint a scene which had a lovely blue sky, and I took a photograph and turned the photograph to a black and white image, and I got quite a shock and surprise that the actual sky was as dark value as the side of the buildings in shadow. So, you know, it's often worth turning your photo to a black and white image and just have a quick look at it, and you'll see that the values, particularly of the sky, because sometimes it is actually quite dark. And that will make this building look really bright, because if we go too light with the sky, your building's not going to have the tonal range, the contrast. So let's paint this wall here. That'll be a nice easy one to do. Got a little bit of space here. I'm going to have to wipe the palette in a moment. So it looks pink, so we'll start with white. But this brush has come out of my oil well, and it's obviously had some yellow ochre on it or something, so it's turned this paint, this white, to yellow, but that's okay, because all I've got to do is look at that. Okay, it's too yellow, it needs to be more red, so I'll add a small amount of red. And much better to add just small amounts. I added too much there probably. So now it's too dark, so I will just lighten it ever so slightly by adding more white. But I'm going to go slightly darker, just to, well, slightly more saturated, so more sort of pink in there rather than white. And I think we'll maybe have a go at some broken colour on this wall, add a bit of texture. So maybe we'll just drag some white with just a touch of yellow in afterwards. So again, I'll be careful around these windows to leave a little bit of a gap. And just bring it down to the top of that tray. Bring that down there. And I'll keep that brush separate. So already the scene's got a sense of light on it already, with contrast, and the perspective is helping you know, with the scene. And I find it's much easier to dot around the painting, the panel. It keeps it interesting. I think that if you start from this corner, work your way down, you know, it's a bit laborious, I think. So, you know, and we can now perhaps put this wall in here. So I've got another brush. So this wall is actually lighter in value, so we'll make sure we get that white. So instead of pulling some red into there, I'll just pull some of this pink into that white, which looks pretty good. And that rooftop actually needs to come out further here, so I've made a little mistake there, but that's fine, I can fix that. Again, I'll just paint around those windows. And I'm not sure which would be easier, to paint around the window or paint the window first and then paint around it. So let's perhaps leave that one painted around, and then we'll try experiment, see which is easiest, the best way to do it. So I've got a small shape here, so back to a small brush. So we'll have a go at mixing that blue. So the cobalt blue into there. Again, it's too blue, it needs to be more of a bluey green, so I just add some yellow. And, you know, I've probably got some blues that straight from the tube, maybe a better, you know, some phthalo blue or something. But, you know, sometimes you just got to go with what you've got. And I'm not that worried about matching that blue exactly. You know, that close enough will do. So that's the close to the colour, just needs to be a bit lighter. So I'll go with that. So we want a fairly sharp edge here, so nicely load up brush. And just paint the general shape of it. And we'll do the same here. And I'll keep that brush for this blue because we'll need that for all these other shutters. So I'll take another small brush, one in slightly better shape. So I tend to find, you know, the brushes, they get worn, you know, that's very loose, which is great for doing things like trees and so on. But a brush that's a little bit newer, you know, has got a better shape. So I shall use that if I want a bit of control. So I've got this dark that we mixed for the steps. That's probably okay. It needs to be cooler, so more blue. And it's not as dark as that. You know, it looks black in the reference here, but you know, when I hold up black paint to it, it's not as dark as that. So I can just perhaps pull some of this grey there. And that's lightening it slightly, even a bit lighter. And the problem is if you just put black in it, well, it looks black, you know, just put it in there. But, you know, there might be black elsewhere in the scene, so that's darker. So you don't, you lose your dark is dark then if you just kind of put it everywhere. So that looks pretty good. So I want a sharp edge across the top here. So just drag it across and just try and do it as confidently as possible and just accept that's your mark. You know, if you got it slightly off, you know, whatever, just leave it. If it's a problem at the end of the painting, do something about it. But if it's not, which it probably won't be, just leave it. Same there. And if I just take that brush that was a bit worn, without any paint on it, I can just feather those two together. You know, and that's a lot messier than what's there, but I'm going to leave it because, you know, I'd rather go for a spontaneous brush mark than something that looks overworked and fiddled about with. And, you know, it looks possibly a little bit too square, it needs to be more oblong, but again, I can correct it with the building afterwards if need be. So this one is easier in the fact that we haven't got the white around it, so, you know, perhaps it's easier to do it that way. And then back to the brush with the white on. So here I can just nice load up brush, just drag it across. There. That's where we want those nice crisp edges. And yeah, this is an old wall here, so, you know, we can use these brush marks to be adding a bit of texture. So there's a sharp edge in here down to that door, across the top there, and I've just accidentally just dragged some of that window into the wall, but leave it, you know, it looks great. You know, that's the little gems that present themselves as your painting that you want to keep. So I think it's easier and more effective to paint the window first and then use the wall to cut around it. So probably a good idea just to paint all the windows. all the shutters. So we've got the blue there. That's pretty close. And I know that that shutter's darker, but I will just use, when I paint the dark in there, I'll just feather it over that to make it darker. And that door is a little bit lighter, so I'll just add a little bit of white. And more blue over this side. And just paint the shapes you see. I just see a line of the blue there, and same here, a line of blue that's just slightly thicker. And then the door on that side, we've got some light on that side where the door frame is in the sunlight. And then I'll just drag a bit of blue in there. But again, I'll keep that brush full of blue because we're bound to be needing to touch up areas. So again, the dark, so we've got that grey. So now we need to go more towards a black. So I'll start another pile over here with the red and the ultramarine blue. That was a Lazaran crimson, so it's 2 black. So a little bit of yellow will lighten it. But if I added white, it'd probably go more sort of purple. So that's pretty good. So that window just looks to be quite dark. And there's a little bit of blue across the top there that I've missed in there. And this is a filbert. It's fairly new. Some of the fibres are falling off on the new brush. But I can just make a sharp edge here, which is quite an important part of the painting. So we've got a sharp edge there and we've got a soft edge there. So that's also what I'm thinking about quite a bit when I'm painting. Tonal value, colour and edges. And it was probably the edges that were the last thing that I ever thought about. And then, you know, composition and things like that. But the edges are so important for creating realism. So I've just wiped that brush off completely because I don't want to put just that dark paint over there. But I'll just drag the brush over there and just let those two mix together to create that soft edge. And then I'll use that grey for the shadow on the other side of those doors. And that grey, I would say, is a warm grey. It steers towards purple. And then just paint those shapes you see. And back to the blue, I missed a window. That one there, that's behind that tree. Again, just check. It's quite dark in there, and that's got a more of an arch, that one. More paint. So nice strong dark in there with a crisp edge along the top and on the edge there. But there's a softer edge as it joins there. So again, I'll just wipe off most of the paint and then just join those two with a soft edge. And it's those edges there that will make your painting look very, very realistic. Same here, and you might just need to just drag the brush down once You know, if you scrubbed it too much, you're just going to make this too dark, the door, which we need the light on that door. So just drag it down. That's done. So I think we've done all the doors. I think we could probably paint this dark shape here and maybe even perhaps paint the tree. It's probably easier to paint the wall around the tree maybe. There's no easy way to probably do that. So we've got a dark in there. You know, we can leave out some of the detail. So that's two red. So let's put some yellow, blue, makes green, add some red. So mix the primary colours there. That's giving me a much stronger dark. So probably a good idea to paint that tree trunk while we've got the drawing. It's quite a nice shape. And again, this filbert brush, very versatile. You can use it on its side, on its end. Keep reloading that brush. And if I've made the branch too thick there, you know, I can probably thin it down with the wall when I paint it. So this is probably the trickiest part of the painting, is the tree there, but don't let it fool you. It's just exactly the same as everywhere else. It's just a shape, a tonal value, but the only reason it looks tricky because there's so many of them, so we'll just simplify it. So if I close one eye and squint, I can see a dark shape here, which is the underside of the tree, because obviously it's a round shape, so to speak. So the underside is receiving less light. The top of it is receiving some highlights because of the sun, and then there's just mid-tones in it. So let's just break it down to two simple shapes, or three values. So we've got a dark, which is not as dark as there. So, and I tend to use the side of the brush, just scumble some paint on there. We don't want to make it too thick, the paint here, so we've got lots of paint on, because when you come to paint the wall around it, you're going to have so much paint on there, it's just going to muddy everything up. So just keep it thin, just scrape it onto the surface there. You know, you could leave the tree out, you know, it's not that important for the scene, but I think it's quite nice. So there's the dark values. And we've got a green on there that's fairly cool. So if I just pick some sap green up and put it on there, and that's a start. So it's too green, it needs to be more blue. Some cobalt blue. And maybe the cool green is what's making that the red flowers on it look good. You know, it's the greys. You know, this I would say is a green that's heading towards grey. You know, it's these greys that make those colours really sing. So the greys are so important. So if I just, again, just very light pressure on the brush, and just treat it as one solid shape. Once the wall's finished, I'll put some little bits of detail on afterwards. And we'll do the highlights afterwards on the tree as well, I think. So we've got the main shape of the tree in, and that's looking okay. Right. And looking at the scene here, the actual stain of the panel here, I think looks nicer than the white there. So I think we can afford to go a little bit more warmer here. This is a mid-journey image, you know, so they're not always perfect. But it's a good composition, and you know, as artists, we can play with it a little bit. So perhaps use a bigger brush. I know we don't want to be here all day, so we can get this covered up quite quickly and then put in the details. So that red at the bottom is quite nice, which is what's on the brush there at the moment. But I think I'll exaggerate it slightly. So I'll just add just a small touch of Alizarin Crimson. So now I've got a slightly darker red there. And this is important, this sharp edge here. And also we've got a sharp edge there. So I think if I add some yellow into this, and probably the yellow ochre will be a more natural looking yellow. So that's probably a little bit on the dark side, so just add a little bit of white. So I think that looks okay. Now go a little bit darker. Perhaps the base of the building is receiving a little bit less light. Again, take care of edges. Keep that edge sharp. Paint around that tree, and it's probably safer just to give it a wide berth, just don't paint into the tree. Again, sharp edge there. And we can use some broken colour, just put some of that yellow in there. And I think we'll go for adding just a little bit more white, lighten the value as we get further up here. Again, just look where the edges are sharp. Make any little mistakes like I did there, just painted the wall into the window, just leave it, fix it at the end if it needs fixing. It might be a really nice part of the painting. Again, we've got a sharp edge there. So that's that wall done. We'll add some of that yellowy sort of peach colour maybe on this wall, but just drag it over the surface and just let it catch some of the raised points. If you've got a canvas, if you've got a smooth panel, just play about with it. And I'll switch to a slightly cleaner brush that's got more sort of white on it, because I think it needs to be lighter over here, and it looks a bit cooler as well. So let's just go a little bit cooler here. And I need to bring that across there, the roof there, because I've got that wrong. I think I shall clean my palette off because I've run out of space at the moment. Drag that all over here. And sometimes you could actually save this paint. No reason why you couldn't paint with that. That's a grey. You can then just steer it to wherever you want it to go. So you could just put it to one side on your palette. You can actually probably buy that grey. Some paint manufacturer will sell it. Waste not, want not. So these shadows under the tree are quite important because we've got a tree there. The shadows need to be good. So perhaps it'd be a good idea to sort those out. and they're grey. So let's use that grey that I started with there. So right tonal value, but it needs to be warmer. So I'll just add a little bit of red, small amount. And to mix that colour from scratch would be a bit of blue, bit of yellow, bit of red, add a bit of white, and then have a look. Where does it need to go? Which probably would be just a little bit of red. So that's pretty good. So, and the shadows, the more simply we paint them, the better they'll look. And we can use this shadow just to sharpen that up slightly. Be careful sometimes with these mid-journey images, because sometimes the shadows don't match up with what you're painting, but I think this looks okay. So we've got a much darker area there. So I've got another brush here. Again, just mix a dark, primary colours together, which will give us a strong dark. And things off in the shadows tend to lose a little bit of detail, so that's quite handy. So that could just be something like that. And probably a good idea to grab another brush and put that red of the plant pot in. So it looks red, not as red as that. So we want to lighten the value. So white, which will steer it towards pink. So we can bring it back towards red with a bit of yellow. A bit more red. But again, you know, does it really matter if you get exactly the right red? Not really. You know, it could be a blue plant pot. But what is important is the tonal value. So close enough. And another plant pot there. Now we can come back and put details in those if it needs it. There's a little shadow on the underside of that plant pot. So I think we can paint the rest of the floor there. So I'll take another brush. I'll use a flat, fairly good size, which can get around there. So it looks white. I'll start with some white paint. And that's pretty much what it is there, really. So let's just see what that looks like. So we've got a real strong, sharp edge here. And if you really load the brush up with lots of paint on it, and then just put it across in one go, that's your sharp edge. You don't want to be painting into that again. That's done. And that wall there's a sharp edge in there. We can paint up to that plant pot, and again we could paint the details of the plant afterwards. So if I just wipe that brush off again, I can just manipulate that edge a little bit, which will just soften it, which will just anchor whatever that is to the ground and give us those shadows. I've picked up some of that paint there, which I could use to put in a little bit of texture in that paving slabs or whatever. Again, I find if I just wipe the brush, I can get most of that paint off, because I need to just put in some of that wall coming through there. Just keep reloading the brush each time. And probably if I just pick up some of the paint from there, and just put it into there, I think it will unify that wall a little bit. So I'll have a break from that because I find I'm just picking up bits of paint and making a bit of a mess there. So let's put that window in next, I think. Back to a brush that's got a half reasonable end. So we've pretty much got the canvas covered now. So it's, you know, from this stage, it's just adding those final bits of detail without losing the sort of spontaneity and the freshness of it. So let's get the pink in there. So we know if we put some red into that white, we're going to get pink. Just do a little test. It needs to be more yellow, so add some yellow. It's too dark in value, so add some white. And I'm going to go slightly darker because I've gone slightly darker with the wall here. So I need to probably also go darker in some other areas. So you might have to just allow for it if you've made it slightly darker as well, because we need the contrast there. So we just drag that brush down because we want a sharp edge. And then we've got another one there. And I find with windows and things, you know, if we make that window really good, you know, and maybe that one and that one, the rest of them, they don't need to be perfect, that the eye will fill the rest of them in. So we've got slightly darker red at the top there, darker than that. So let's just mix it into that dark. That's pretty good. And particularly, and that's what I've always done with watercolor, is don't make the windows all the same. You know, make sure they've got a nice bit of variety in them. Otherwise, it all just looks very static. Need a dark. I don't think there's no problem having black on your palette. I think you could use it. You just need to perhaps just add blue or red with it as well, just to make it a bit more pleasing to the eye. So again, we've got a real sharp edge here. So I've really loaded that brush up. There's a lot of paint on that brush. So I can pull that down in one go and get that nice crisp edge there. Now if I just wipe that brush off, give it a good clean off, we need a soft edge on those eaves. So again, I can just drag that brush across there and go to where I need to go on the edge there. That's given us a nice soft edge there. And just add a bit of red into there, and then I can carry my rooftop where it needs to go, maybe with a little bit of a overhang. when you get the whole canvas covered, you can then start to see things that, you know, perhaps aren't quite right and so on. For instance, I think, you know, that needs to be just a little bit darker. So make that darker there. And we need some darks on that window there. So this doorway in the shadow has got some softer edges, perhaps got a hard edge where it's out in the sunlight here. But in here, it's all just a bit soft. So, you know, I can paint the door into the wall, paint it into the staircase. And again, that's going to make your shadows more convincing as well. And we've got some windows here, which again, you know, they don't have to be perfect. And if anything, making them less perfect will be more convincing. Now, just a drag of the brush. Make best of them. It's fine. So my staircase needs to be darker in value. That's you know, at this stage you can sort of step back from your panel and you can start to see things. Okay, that's not quite right. So let's just make that darker. And it's a cool dark, so a big blob of cobalt blue in there. So we'll try and make these steps look convincing. So I use these horizontal marks. Getting slightly bigger, so I press slightly harder with the brush as we get further down. Embrace mistakes, for instance, there. Bring that across there. And that final step there that just connects down there. We've got a little bit of a dark in there that just lets us know where the base of the building is. You can even just, and when I'm painting, I'm always sort of thinking, you know, how I can speed things up. You know, I've got the dark on this brush here, which is what I needed to do this, but I need now a lighter value to do the little highlight on the steps. And if I just drag the brush across the base here, it's going to put that little dark in on the edge there and pick up some white paint. Paint that step. Paint up into that wall slightly. Let's put that line in there. Put the base of that building in there. So I'm picking up white paint, which should give me the right value on this brush almost. Same under here. There's a dark under there, that shadow. And again, you could just check your tone on value, but I'm kind of guessing that I know that this purpley dark I've got here mixed with that white will give me a purple, which will probably suit okay for that shadow colour there. So now if I check what's happened to that brush, I've now got a lighter value on there, add a little bit more, which needs to add a little bit of yellow into there just to turn it more towards grey, just a touch lighter. So decisive strokes, decide where it's going to go, put it in, reload the brush, look where the next one goes, put it in. And again, like the windows, perhaps don't try and make them all too perfect, break the line up. And they should get slightly thinner because as they get towards the top, you don't really see the little highlight on the step anymore. And what we've got going on here at the moment is the wall and the staircase. They need connecting. You know, it's not connected here at the moment. That looks like it's just stuck on, and then that's what I think, you know, as a beginner, I often faced as a problem. So I need to use edges to connect all this up. So I'll just feather that into there slightly. We're going to have that banister coming down here in a moment. But we can... It's probably a soft edge in there. It's only very subtle. But again, if I just drag that brush down there and soften that edge. It's going to add connection. Connect it to the base of that wall. And we need to go, I think, slightly darker, the base down here. And also we've got a sharp edge here, which is causing a problem. That needs to be a soft edge because we're in the shadows here. So I shall just feather that out. Don't want to lose that sharp edge there. I'll make that a little bit darker. Again, I quite like those directional lines. Connect it up to the wall. And sometimes if you get a little bit too detailed with stuff, it causes problems. So I might just mess it up slightly. Again, just connect up there. Now that reads slightly better, I think. So if I take a rigger, add a bit of white, some of that blue, a nicely loaded up brush, and have a little practice go a few times, and then put it in. And then there's a strong dark at the front of that banister. So I think we've got a slight issue I have on mine that this wall is too different in value there. So let's just put some of that in there. And I can just dot a little bit through the tree. Just turning the brush slightly so I get a new bit of brush on there. And then I'll put the highlights on that tree, add some flowers, and then look to see what else to put on there. So I use a round brush because I'll just roll that brush on there. So it's all quite cool, but I think I'm going to try a warmer yellow on the top of that tree, see what happens. So just try that. So it's quite a warm yellow. And just drag it on, and it's just on the sort of top of the tree where the light is catching the tree there. Maybe a little bit down there. That looks okay. Looks convincing. We'll perhaps pop some red on there. So if I use this fan brush, it's going to give me an abstract mark. The red, a little bit darker than what's on there, but let's just use the corner of it, move it about. Nice and quick. And it's the little things that make a difference, that there's a bit of light on the inside of that door and on the step, which I haven't got there. So let's put that in. So another brush. And again, this brush probably had a bit of yellow on it. So I'll mix it with the white. And we've got a nice load up brush. Nice decisive mark. That's where it goes. Wasn't exactly where I wanted it to go, but I'd rather just have the fresh mark than it actually in the perfect place. And same there. And then there's also a little highlight in there, which is why that door looks too square, because I painted it too much. So I can fix that with that little highlight. So reload that brush up and lay the paint on top of there. And I think I need a little bit more light on that blue. So you've got a couple of options really. You could just mix the blue again, but maybe, you know, try if you've got some phthalo blue or something. Let's see if we can make a more powerful blue. It's drying up in the jar. See, it's faster drying. So if I put a bit of phthalo blue on there, don't need a lot because it goes a long way. So again, if you haven't got any phthalo blue, just go with whatever blue you've got. But by adding white, will make it lighter in value, but it will also lose its intensity, which is what, you know, we don't want. So phthalo blue being a very intense colour, if I just pick up a little bit of that phthalo blue, now that's going to give me a much more powerful blue than the cobalt blue can achieve. So I just drag it over and leave some of the other blue to come through. But that's you know, quite a nice blue. And same in there. Again, same with the phthalo blue. If you get other paint mixed in with it, it's going to desaturate and start to be a bit grayer. But that shutter there has got quite a bit of light on it. And where that part of the frame is in the sunlight. So that's all I would use the phthalo blue for, really. I think that you know, it creates very unnatural looking colours. So for man-made objects like paint and so on, it does work quite well. So some green for the plants. So just add some blue into there. So we're going for a loose painting here, so let's just keep it loose. There, we're actually in the shadow there. Maybe just one or two little leaves, just give that illusion of detail. You'll see your shadow might change. A little bit cooler towards the base of the tree. And that's probably less green in there because it's in shadow. There's another plant in there. Just take my rigger and put those branches back in where I've lost them. Just make that a little bit darker. We need a smaller branch off there. But that's probably all we need. Don't need any more than that. We need a shadow under the base of there. And I think at this stage, you know, we're now sort of over an hour into it, so probably fatigue is starting to come in a little bit. So the only things I would perhaps do now is maybe, you know, it's quite nice maybe to suggest those roof tiles, you know, with a small brush. Now I tried it with just dragging it across, which I think would look better with a little bit of texture to suggest those. But just using a rigger there. And then it's a little bit darker over the other side. Ooh, not as dark as that. But that's what happens, you know, you keep painting, you become a little bit less worried about checking your values as you were when you first started painting, and it's very quick to lose your painting. So I think at this stage I'd take away my reference picture, look at it again in a day or two, and then decide, does it need anything adding to it? You know, is there anything to gain? And make a judgment then. I totally forgot the balcony, so let's put that in. So again, decisive marks, not messing about there. And it's all a bit wibbly wobbly, but that's fine. It all adds character, that's what I say. And the dark under there. And an angle there that goes back to attach it to the wall. And probably a shadow on that one. And then there's just a little bit of red. And if you've, like me, just made that a little bit too wobbly, let's just correct it. Slightly better. Yeah, we'll go with that. And you start to notice things everywhere. There's a little bit of light on the underside of there. So it definitely relied on an accurate drawing. That if I was going to draw this freehand, I certainly would probably use a proportional divider to measure angles and so on. So for me, tracing it was the quickest, easiest way to do it. But obviously you could draw it freehand, just got to be careful, you know, getting the angles right, because it wouldn't take a lot to, you know, get your angle slightly off and it's just going to look out. So no amount of good painting is going to fix the bad drawing. And it's all about the edges, really. We've got the soft edge in here. And again, sometimes I would use my finger to just soften edges even further. But be careful fiddling at this stage, because fresh eyes tomorrow works wonders. There you go. Good luck with your painting. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe. And if you enjoyed this video, you'll love this one.